Pharma was a sleep-deprived researcher who overworked himself and died on a couch like a loser. However, he got isekai'd into a fantasy world as a noble with divine powers. But when he opened a clinic to cure people, he ended up rizzing them so bad that they came back hoping to taste his vitamin D. After his death, he awoke in the body of the youngest son of the Dematicis family, which left him confused. However, his maid in this new world, Charlotte, explained that he had been struck by lightning. With this revelation, Pharma figured that overworking himself had gotten him isekai'd behind Truck Kun's back. After helping him remove his bandages, Charlotte noticed strange marks on his arms and panicked. He tried to explain that the marks resulted from being struck by lightning, but she was convinced they were holy marks of the god of medicine and began to pray. Following this, she took him on a tour of the manor, telling him about his family and how they were a house of royal Pharmacians and practitioners of divine arts. Assuming his memories had been fried by lightning, Charlotte warned that unless he remembered how to use his divine art, he would be driven out of the estate because the ability to use divine arts was the mark of nobility. Without it, he was nothing but a commoner. After this, Pharma returned to his room, worried that he'd never be able to use his divine arts. However, after creating a mental image of the water molecules, he's able to use water magic. Fascinated by what he'd just done, Pharma went on to create simple substances and compounds by just picturing their chemical structures. However, he erased them when Charlotte entered the room. She took him to the study, and as he flipped through a medical book, he was surprised to learn that the medical knowledge of that world was stuck in the medieval age. Later, he joined the rest of his family for dinner, and while they ate, his father informed him that he would return to learning with his tutor, Eleanor, since he had recovered. Pharma met Eleanor the next day, but the woman was suspicious of him and pointed out that he spoke and acted differently. Thankfully, Pharma convinced her that it was because he was still recovering from the lightning incident. Hearing this, she decided to teach him how to use his divine arts properly. During the lesson, she taught him that each noble had a guardian deity, and that the guardian deity of his family was the Panictheos. As their lesson continued, she took him to a riverbank to practice his divine art, and things got out of control when Pharma tried to make a water spear. Shocked, Eleanor checked the level of his divine power using a divinometer and freaked out when it overloaded. Pharma tried to understand what the big deal was, but she ignored his questions because she noticed the glowing marks on his arms. Like Charlotte, she referred to them as the Panictheos' holy marks, but warned him never to show them to anyone. On their way back to the estate, they stopped to take a break, so Pharma tried to cheer her up by asking her to use her hands as glasses. While doing that, he accidentally activated his divine eye, which allowed him to see that Eleanor had a sprained finger. This only solidified Eleanor's theory that he was the god Panictheos, and as she was freaking out about this, she noticed he didn't have a shadow. Overcome with fear, she screamed and ran off, ignoring Pharma's calls for her to come back. The next day, Bruno informed Pharma that Eleanor had sent a letter, saying she was out with a fever. He also mentioned that she wanted to stop being his tutor and asked Pharma if he knew the reason, to which he answered no, because he didn't know how to explain the events of the previous day without sounding like a complete nutjob. Accepting his answer, Bruno instructed him to take a potion and a letter to Eleanor, but Pharma noticed that the potion was more or less an energy drink, so he made some acetaminophen for her fever and salve for her finger. At Eleanor's home, she approached Pharma wearing a suit of armor because she assumed he was there to silence her. Pharma assured her that he was only there to drop off the medicine and letter from his father, and also gave her the medicine he had made. Immediately, she assumed the medicine was poison and refused to take it, but he convinced her that it wasn't. He also tried to pull a talk no jutsu to convince her to remain his tutor, but the woman wasn't prepared to change her mind. Seeing this, he presented her with a bouquet to thank her for the time she spent being his tutor, and left after promising never to disturb her again. Alone, Eleanor contemplated whether or not to take the medicine Pharma made. She was prepared to toss it in the bin, but changed her mind because Pharma was just a harmless boy, so there wasn't any need for her to be afraid. The next day, she showed up at Pharma House still dressed in her armor and told Pharma that she would continue being his tutor. Pharma asked what she needed the armor for, and she said it was for her protection since he was now one of those overpowered MCs. Grateful, Pharma thanked her for coming back, but she told him that she was the one who was thankful because the medicine he made had worked better than any drug she'd taken before. With that said, she announced that their training arc would take place at an uninhabited island so that his powers would remain a secret. On the island, Eleanor demonstrated the spells and instructed Pharma on what to do. but he still couldn't control his powers. However, she assured him that with time, he'd learn to control his arts and promised to keep teaching him. Later, Pharma sat on the stairs in his family home, taking notes on the diagnosis he had made on some of the staff using his divine eye. While doing this, he learned that when full recovery was possible, the light disappeared, and when it wasn't, the light only dimmed. Following this, he decided to begin his free treatment scheme by making a remedy for Charlotte since he noticed she had dry hands. Using his knowledge and divine arts, he created a moisturizing cream and steroid salve and went to give it to Charlotte. The girl was delighted to receive the medicine and asked if she could share it with her mother and the other servants. Pharma answered that she didn't have to because he had already prepared some things for the staff, which surprised her. After Pharma finished playing the role of Santa Claus, he commented that the reactions of the staff were unexpected. Charlotte explained that it was because they had never received medicine from their masters, which surprised him. He asked why that was, and she said it was because aristocratic pharmacians didn't examine commoners. Even if they did, the commoners were too poor to afford their medicines. Hearing this made Pharma feel sad, so he said that going forward, he wanted to make medicine available to all those who needed it. Days later, when Pharma joined his family for breakfast, his father informed him that Blanche had come down with chickenpox and asked him to stay away from her for the next 3 weeks. However, he hinted that Pharma could see her because he had had chickenpox in the past, and warned him to be careful, as it was possible to get reinfected. Bruno's extensive knowledge about the disease impressed Pharma, as he'd assumed the people of that world had limited knowledge about diseases. After breakfast, Pharma went to the lab to prepare some acyclovir and valacyclovir to treat Blanche. Once the medicine was ready, he snuck into Blanche's room with it, and, after examining her with his divine eye, he convinced her to take the medicine by putting it inside a macaron. After taking the medicine, Blanche asked where he'd gotten it from because their father had said that chickenpox didn't have any medicine. Pharma was caught off guard by her question, but he quickly explained that he'd read about it in a new book and asked her to keep it a secret. The next moment, she began scratching her body, so Pharma told her not to do it, as doing that would spread the virus. Unfamiliar with the word, Blanche asked Pharma for an explanation, so he told her it was an evil spirit that was too small to see. This scared her, but he assured her that there was nothing to fear and promised to stay longer with her. A few days later, while Bruno examined Blanche, he noted that her recovery was quick, and the girl told him it was a secret. Later that day, Pharma made a handheld microscope so he could show Blanche what viruses and bacteria looked like. Just as he finished making the microscope, someone knocked on the door and informed him that his father was requesting his presence. Upon arriving at the study, Bruno told Pharma that their presence was required at the palace because the Empress Elizabeth was sick and needed urgent treatment. Pharma was shocked by his father's statement, but the shock cleared when he noticed his father's cough. He attempted to examine and diagnose him using his divine eye, but Bruno interrupted him, so he decided to leave the examination until after they visited the palace. When they arrived at the palace, they were greeted by Claude, the chief royal physician, who informed Bruno that the Empress's condition had taken a turn for the worse. They were taken to her room, where the other physicians waited, and Pharma watched his father perform some tests on the Empress. After carefully observing the results, Bruno went to speak with Claude and the astronomer, who informed him that the stars weren't aligned properly. This meant that there was no hope for the Empress to survive, so Bruno made a sleeping potion and asked the Empress to inhale it, assuring her that she would be fine. As Pharma watched on, he realized that they weren't trying to save her and were only doing what they could to lessen her pain. When he overheard Claude send for a priest, he became annoyed, so he used his divine eye to examine the Empress and discovered that her ailment was tuberculosis, or as they liked to call it, the White Death. In his world, it would have been an easy thing to treat, but in this world where medical knowledge was limited, he knew he'd be exposing himself to scrutiny. Just as he contemplated stepping in, the young Prince Louis burst into the room and rushed to his mother's side. His retainer, Noah, tried to convince him to let his mother rest, but the boy refused and held on to his mother. As the boy cried, Pharma approached the Empress and asked for her permission to treat her. He said there was new medicine for her illness, which shocked everyone and had his father asking if he didn't like his head anymore. When he tried pulling Pharma away, the Empress ordered him to stop and asked Pharma if he was sure the medicine would work. Pharma assured her that it would, so she entrusted him with her life and permitted him to prepare the medicine. After this, Pharma locked himself inside one of the labs in the palace, using ice to keep the door wedged and stop his father from entering. Tapping into his inner Einstein, he easily deduced that he needed at least 3 or 4 drugs to prevent the bacteria from gaining resistance. With that in mind, he wrote out the chemical structures of isoniazid, pyrazinamide, ethambutol, and rifampin, combining them into one. As he began creating the drug, Bruno broke down the door and walked inside, demanding to know what Pharma was doing. Pharma answered that he was preparing the medicine for the Empress, but Bruno told him to stop being stupid. He said the White Death had no cure, surprising Pharma as he hadn't realized Bruno knew the exact cause of Elizabeth's illness. Bruno tried to convince Pharma to abandon his silly idea that he was going to save the Empress, but Pharma swore the medicine existed. He also told Bruno that he needed to take the medicine as well, shocking the man because he thought he had hidden the fact that his cough wasn't normal very well. Pharma then tried to get back to making the drug, but Bruno intervened, destroying the paper with the formula by using his divine arts. Annoyed, Pharma turned to face the man, but he wasn't given the chance to speak, as Bruno had his wand and some ice spike pointed at him. He demanded to know what Pharma was compounding, and when Pharma didn't answer, he assumed it was poison. Immediately, he tried to destroy the substance Pharma had already created, so Pharma stopped him by erecting an ice barrier. Bruno was left stunned once again, and this time he questioned who Pharma was, but Pharma couldn't explain the situation. Curious for answers, Bruno picked up Pharma's medical journal and flipped through it. He asked what they were, and Pharma answered that they were new medicines. He claimed he dreamed of them after getting struck by lightning, which was Cap, and Bruno would have thought so too had he not noticed Pharma's glowing marks. Intrigued, he assumed that the Panic-Theos had granted Pharma his blessing and wondered what in the plot twist was happening. His thoughts were cut off by Pharma, who pleaded with him to administer the drug to the Empress and claim he had compounded it so he could save face amongst the other physicians and pharmacists. Surprisingly, Bruno turned down his offer, saying the medicine one made was theirs to give. He added that since the Empress had staked her life on Pharma's medicine, he too must stake his life on giving it to her since he was the pharmacist. Pharma agreed with his words and dispelled the barrier so he could return to work. As Bruno watched Pharma work, he recalled the times he used to cry when he failed to make a compound as a child, so he asked if he was his son, and Pharma replied that he considered himself to be. A little while later, Pharma returned to the Empress's room with the medicine. Before administering the medicine to the Empress, Pharma pulled out his mini microscope along with the stain of the sample Bruno had taken from her. He asked the Empress to hold it up to her eye and peer through the hole towards some light. When she did that, she was astonished by the sight of the bacteria and handed the device over to Claude to see for himself. As all the court physicians and pharmacists were awed at seeing microorganisms for the first time, the Empress asked what they were. Pharma explained that they were called bacteria and were responsible for her illness. However, he assured her that if she took the medicine properly for half a year, she would recover. Hearing that it would take half a year for the Empress to heal completely, Claude voiced his complaints, but Elizabeth agreed to take the medicine. Pharma poured the medicine into 2 cups, one for the Empress and the other for himself, so he could prove he wasn't trying to isekai the woman. Once the Empress had drunk her own, Pharma addressed the room, saying that with a new medicine in their arsenal, they didn't have to worry about losing people to the White Death again. The people were overjoyed and, like any curious scientist, they began asking Pharma questions about the things they didn't know. That night, as Bruno and Pharma returned home, Bruno couldn't help but observe Pharma. He compared the boy before him with the boy he raised and concluded that they weren't the same people. When they arrived at the estate, Pharma pulled out another batch of medicine and asked Bruno to take it. At first, it seemed like Bruno wouldn't, but after making a long speech about the Panic-Theos and his blessing, he took the medicine. Pharma then asked Bruno to continue guiding him so they could pursue the path of medicine together, and Bruno happily agreed. 3 months passed, and Pharma and Bruno slipped into a comfortable relationship where they shared their knowledge on medicine. Bruno mentioned that the College of Medicine wanted the recipe for the White Death medicine to be made public. However, he made up an excuse as to why it couldn't be done yet. Surprisingly, Pharma told him that he planned to make the recipe public because he believed all useful knowledge ought to be shared with everyone. In doing so, others would share what they knew, and discoveries could be made by combining their knowledge. Bruno pointed out that not everyone would understand things from Pharma's point of view, as both his knowledge and beliefs were from a pharmaceutical perspective. This alone was heresy among the nobles, and they might try to silence him permanently, so he had to be careful. Switching the topic to the Empress's illness, Bruno mentioned that there were rumors that she had been targeted with the White Death. Pharma believed that the rumors were far-fetched because the probability of an infected person falling ill was about 10%. Bruno found this new information shocking, and when he asked Pharma if the Panictheos had revealed it to him, he said yes. To avoid further questioning, he excused himself to go see the Empress and yeeted out of the place faster than a guy who was almost caught cheating. When Pharma arrived at the palace, he was met by Noah, who pulled him aside to ask what kind of reward he wanted for treating the Empress. He said the woman was considering rewarding him for saving her life, so he wanted to know what he'd ask for. He assumed Pharma would be interested in wealth, power, territories, or even fame, but Pharma said he wanted to open a pharmacy. Later, while Pharma tended to the Empress, she admitted that while she lay hopelessly on her deathbed 3 months ago, she had fallen into the depths of despair. She said if it wasn't because he was as convincing as Captain Irwin, she never would have believed she would recover and would have never taken the medicine. What had saddened her the most about her illness was that she went from being the most powerful person in the empire to being like Sakura. Now, she didn't feel like she was worthy enough to keep her throne and continue ruling her people. Instead of giving her a speech on how she would still slay as the Empress, Pharma asked who it was that needed her the most when she fell sick. Elizabeth answered that it was her son, Lucas, so Pharma advised her to think of things from a mother's perspective. He said the same way Louis loved and needed her was the same way the people of the Empire loved and needed her. His words made Elizabeth see things from a different perspective, and the feeling of worthlessness left as she laughed with Pharma. Before leaving, he advised her to treat her second chance at life better than she did the first because he intended to do the same. Several months passed, and the Empress, who was now fully recovered, sent for Bruno because she wished to discuss something about Pharma with him. A few days later, a ceremony was held at the palace, and Bruno took Pharma along with him. During the ceremony, the Empress granted Bruno the territory of Marcera, which was known for its medicinal herbs, as a reward for the role he played in her recovery. Pharma was also rewarded with a promotion from apprentice to royal pharmacist, and she also surprised him by permitting him to open a pharmacy in the capital. Days later, workers hired by the palace showed up at the Médicis family estate and informed Pharma that the Empress had ordered them to begin building his pharmacy. Eleanor also showed up and informed him that Bruno had instructed her to assist him. The men then told him that he'd have to provide them with a floor plan, so he did. One afternoon, while Pharma was inspecting the building site, the foreman asked what he wished to name the pharmacy. While muttering to himself, Pharma mentioned that he hadn't expected to have an Isekai pharmacy, and for some reason, the foreman assumed that was the name he chose. So the store was named Parallel World Pharmacy, which Pharma thought was unusual, but Eleanor thought was unique. He tried explaining that he didn't want to stand out among the already existing pharmacies, but she told him that a run-in with the Pharmaceutist Guild was inevitable. As soon as the words left her mouth, a cholesterol storage unit named Vernon showed up and introduced himself as the head of the Pharmaceutist Guild. It was clear that he hadn't come in peace, but Pharma easily brushed off his jabs, making him look like a petty old fool. Pharma asked if he needed to join a guild to operate his pharmacy, and Vernon told him that they only offered membership to commoners. Pharma had expected this response, so he wasn't bothered, but Vernon seemed to take offense at that. He told Pharma that he was sure his goods would be as expensive as the new Dior collection, but Pharma assured him that everything in his pharmacy would be at low prices. This statement shocked Vernon, as he didn't believe the aristocracy knew the meaning of low prices, and when he started complaining about it, Eleanor stepped in. She told him that if he wanted to pick a fight, she'd gladly indulge him, and the scared fatso ran away without arguing. Days later, the pharmacy was finished, and after checking to see that they had everything they needed, Pharma mentioned that he needed someone to handle their finances. Charlotte volunteered to do it, but Pharma told her that they didn't need a clown. The girl kept insisting that she could be useful to them, so to appease her, he hired her to be the errand girl. When he arrived home later that day, he met Blanche and some of the staff members in the hallway, looking as if someone had died. Curious, he asked what happened, and Cedric informed him about his impromptu retirement, which surprised him. It turned out that Bruno had more or less given Cedric the boot because his knees were on the verge of ghosting him. Upon hearing this, Pharma offered to treat Cedric, promising that after the treatment, he'd be fine. However, he said he had to come work for him. Once Cedric agreed, Pharma rushed to his father's study to inform him that he'd be poaching Cedric, and surprisingly, the man seemed chill about it. He gave Pharma a chest full of money and told him to use it for his pharmacy, stating that with Cedric in his employment, he didn't have to worry about his money going missing. It was at that moment that Pharma realized that his father had set everything up so he'd hire Cedric, and he felt grateful. Sometime later, Pharma officially opened his store, and his opening speech was received with mixed reactions. Some of the commoners, including Vernon, thought he was just some trust fund kid playing house with his daddy's money, while others were intrigued by him. A month later, business wasn't moving as expected, so Pharma wondered out loud how to transform the place from a ghost town to a thriving business. Eleanor assured him that it was normal for new businesses to have a slow start, especially one owned by an aristocrat. She said commoners tended to avoid them like they carried the plague, and the aristocrats preferred to place orders instead of venturing into the stores. During their tea break, Charlotte walked in with the results of the survey she conducted among the commoners to find out why they weren't visiting the store. The most common response was that they found the imperial seal outside the building scary. The second was that most of them were afraid of offending Pharma since they knew nothing about etiquette. The third was about their clothing, as they believed their rags were an inappropriate attire to be worn inside such an establishment. The fourth was about the intimidating-looking guards posted outside the store. The fifth was that the people didn't trust that an underdeveloped man like Pharma would be knowledgeable enough about medicine. Some of the other responses included the people's inability to read the signs outside, and the fear that the prices were ridiculously high. After hearing all of this, the team finally knew what areas they needed to tackle and decided to come up with ideas to fix them. Later that day, Jean, the pharmacy's only regular customer, dropped by to get some sailor candies. While Pharma prepared his order, the man helped himself to some water and commented on how refreshing it always was. Pharma asked if he went out to sea often, explaining that the sailor candy he always bought contained vitamin C to help prevent scurvy. Jean didn't respond to Pharma's question and made up an excuse to leave the shop quickly. Surprisingly, Pharma didn't think his behavior was unusual and bid him farewell, saying he'd see him again. However, when Pharma stepped outside the pharmacy, he spotted Jean conversing with some men and wondered who they were. Before he could decide whether or not to approach the group, his parents showed up in some very obvious disguises. Pushing aside his embarrassment, Pharma invited them into the store, and as they were talking, his father asked for a tour of the place. Pharma happily agreed to show them around. He took his time to show them each floor and explained what each one housed. After the tour, Bruno commended Pharma, saying he'd established a fine store, which made the boy feel proud of himself. However, his self-esteem receded like your hairline when Bruno asked about customer traffic in the store. Pharma admitted that although some nobles and merchants patronized them, the commoners had refused to even set foot in the store. After hearing this, Beatrice suggested that Pharma start selling cosmetics to aristocrats. She explained that if they became popular among the aristocrats and the commoners found out that the prices were affordable, they would swarm to the store like bees. Pharma considered this suggestion carefully and, after recalling the time in his previous life when he worked with a cosmetics company to test their products and conduct safety evaluations, he decided to do it. Bruno immediately made it known that if Pharma intended to take his mother's advice, he wasn't allowed to deal in white face powder. He explained that the excessive and continuous use of the white powder led to the deaths of those who used it, but his wife argued that he was being paranoid. Pharma, on the other hand, was impressed by Bruno's deductive abilities, as it was true that the white powder contained harmful heavy metals that often caused death. Bruno also mentioned that some women had turned to bloodletting to achieve naturally pale skin, and he thought it was the most foolish thing they could do. His wife said she understood why those women did it, but he told her that she didn't need to join them because she was already beautiful. Watching his parents act like dumb teenagers in love made Pharma cringe, but thankfully, he was saved by someone coming into the store. The man explained that his mistress had collapsed inside their carriage, so Pharma asked him to take him to her. When he got to the carriage, he noticed that the lady in question looked pale. However, she was still able to converse and answer questions properly. Using his divine eye, he checked to see if she had any undetected symptoms and saw that she was as healthy as a horse. This left him perplexed, but when he noticed some scarring in her arm, he realized that she was one of those women who turned to bloodletting. After her treatment, the girl explained that she'd turned to bloodletting because the man she loved rejected her, and she was hoping to win him back by getting paler skin. Pharma and Eleanor then explained the risks of bloodletting to her, after which Pharma gave her some medicine and told her to stop using white powder. The girl, Chloe, said she couldn't stop using white powder, so Pharma asked her to return in a week to collect a safer replacement for the powder. During the week, Pharma tried on the prototype cream he made for Chloe, and when his team saw him, they laughed and asked if he was trying to become a mime. They also asked if it wasn't harmful to his skin since his father had warned that white makeup was bad. Pharma explained that his cream didn't contain the harmful substances usually found in the white powder, so it was safe for him to use. Eleanor was surprised to learn that lead and mercury could cause so much harm and suggested that Pharma speak to the Empress to ban cosmetics containing them. By the end of the week, Chloe returned to the pharmacy, and Pharma presented her with the makeup he had prepared for her. Initially, Chloe was skeptical about using them. However, after they convinced her to try them, she was amazed by how good she looked. As time went by, Pharma's makeup set became popular, and women trooped into the store daily to purchase them. The only problem with this explosion in sales was that they couldn't keep up with the demand. One afternoon, Chloe dropped by with her friends and was disappointed to learn that the cosmetics had been sold out. However, after Pharma explained the problem they were having with supply and demand, she proposed that he open another store to cater to the cosmetics. She offered to finance the store and hire all the staff, promising that Pharma would still be the sole proprietor. Cedric advised Pharma to take her offer, and thus the Medique Cosmetics store was opened a few weeks later. True to her word, Chloe hired skilled staffers who were all pharmacists who had lost their jobs because of childbirth. Hearing this, Pharma asked her to implement maternity and family leave, so that the woman didn't have to worry about being out of the job because they had to tend to family issues. Days later, Charlotte conducted another review, and this time all the responses were positive. Later on, Pharma took some of the cosmetics to the Empress, and after she tried out the new medicinal lip gloss he brought, they sat down for tea. Pharma thanked the Empress for taking his advice and banning the use of white powder and other cosmetics containing harmful substances. Elizabeth warned him to be careful, as the stores that sold those banned products were on the verge of collapse and might try to harm him for putting them out of business. To this, Pharma expressed his wish to disclose the production process of his cosmetics to the public. Elizabeth agreed that his decision was a wise one, but told him to raise the prices of his goods so that the other merchants had a fighting chance, to which he agreed. Weeks later, Bruno visited Marcera, his new territory, with his family, and while he was discussing the trade reports with his people, he told Pharma to go and explore the place. Having no say in the matter, Pharma left the office and joined Blanche, Charlotte, and Eleanor at the beach. Blanche and Charlotte were building sand castles, but Blanche got bored and asked Pharma for permission to go in the water. Pharma was hesitant to allow her since neither she nor Charlotte could swim, but the girls pleaded with him, promising that they would be careful. Unable to turn them down, he said they were only allowed to dip their feet in the water, and the girls rushed excitedly to the water. As he watched them go, Eleanor spoke up from the spot where she'd been relaxing and told him she was also going in the water. Pharma pointed out her lack of swimwear, but she brushed it aside, saying she didn't need it. She then took off her belt, causing him to freak out because he thought he was about to get a private show. Thankfully, her belt was the only thing she took off, and before she rushed to the water, she asked him to join her. Pharma was about to respond when Blanche and Charlotte caught his attention, so he turned Eleanor down. After she left, he looked at the girls again and, seeing how happy Blanche was, made him remember his little sister from his past life. They used to go to the beach a lot, but because his sister was still too young, he never let her go in the water. He had promised that they would swim together when she got older, but because of her illness, he hadn't kept his promise. In the present, he wiped the tears that escaped his eyes as he thought of his sister, but he couldn't go back to reminiscing because he heard Charlotte scream. The current had pulled Blanche into the sea, and since neither of the girls could swim, there was nothing Charlotte could do to save her. Pharma immediately sprang into action, channeling his inner Michael Phelps. He swam towards Blanche, but the current kept pulling her away. Eleanor, who was right behind Pharma, also experienced difficulty catching up to the siblings, but Pharma refused to let the strong currents deter him. Poor Blanche was soon pulled underwater, and Pharma didn't hesitate to go in after her. As he desperately tried to reach his drowning sister, he thought of his other sister and how he'd been helpless to save her. He didn't want the same thing to happen to Blanche, so he kept fighting against the current to get to her. Sadly, they were too strong and all he could do was scream her name. Suddenly, his marks glowed, and a bright light shot out of the water where he was, shocking Charlotte, who was on the beach. The next moment, all the water in the area where Pharma was disappeared, and he found himself on the dry ocean floor. Eleanor and Blanche were also in that area, but Eleanor was the only one who regained consciousness, and when she saw what had happened, she became shocked. Initially, she assumed that Pharma was using his divine art to hold the water back, but after observing the place thoroughly, she noted that the sand was completely dry. By the time they got to shore, Blanche had regained consciousness, and she cried as Pharma held her. Eleanor asked what the nature of the power he'd used was, and he said it was probably a negative attribute divine art. Eleanor told him it wasn't, explaining that a negative attribute decreased the amount of a substance, but what he'd done was remove all the water from the area they were in. Her words shocked him, but there was nothing he could do to disprove her, and when he noticed Charlotte looking at him with fear, he realized that he had exposed himself. Just then, Eleanor commented on how incredible what he'd done was and said that he did an amazing job saving Blanche. Hearing this filled him with relief because even though he couldn't save his sister in his past life, he'd done so in his new life. That night, he sat in bed thinking about the incident and realized that if he'd been careless, he could have hurt Eleanor and Blanche. Just then, Charlotte came to check if he needed anything before turning in for the night, and he told her that he didn't. The girl then turned to leave, but stopped to look at him again and brought up the incident. Pharma apologized for scaring her, but she asked if he'd replaced his brain with seawater, and said that what he'd done was the most heroic thing she'd ever witnessed. She then apologized for not going after Blanche when the currents carried her away, but Pharma told her that she'd done nothing wrong. He said he was glad that she remained on the shore because if anything had happened to her, he wouldn't have forgiven himself, as he considered her to be as important as family. Hearing this Dominic Toretto wannabe say these words to her made Charlotte happy, and she thanked him with tears streaming down her face. Meanwhile, the reports of what Pharma did on the beach reached the temple and Salomon, the head inquisitor, ordered that he be found so they could eliminate him. Days later, after Pharma returned to the capital and reopened his pharmacy, he talked to Eleanor about how packed the place was. They were in the middle of their discussion when he noticed two cloaked individuals standing at the corner of the room. Believing them to be new customers, Pharma approached them to see if he could assist them with anything, but they glared at him and walked away without saying anything. The next morning, after the guards changed shifts, a blindfolded horse pulling a cart full of sediment charged and crashed into the pharmacy. The incident was immediately reported to Bruno and Pharma, and Bruno ordered that an investigation be carried out. When he asked Pharma if he had any suspects in mind, Pharma's mind immediately went to Vernon and the priests. However, since he didn't have concrete evidence, he decided against telling his father. Later, when he arrived at the pharmacy, he saw the workers trying to clear the place and rushed to ask Cedric for an update. The two then walked inside together, and Cedric used his divine art to purify the place, but said they still had to manually remove all the sediment. While they were discussing, Jean showed up with tattooed Giga Chads, and after he said they had come to help with the cleanup, Pharma expressed his gratitude to them. As the men went to start working, some members of the community came to lend a hand, and Pharma thanked all of them from the bottom of his heart. While the cleaning was ongoing, a woman rushed into the premises and asked Pharma to come and help her father, who had suddenly fainted. They rode to the countryside and walked to an open field, but when Pharma turned to question the woman, he discovered that she'd vanished. The next moment, he was approached by the temple priests and Salomon, who asked if he was the one who erased the sea in Marcera. When Pharma failed to answer, Salomon revealed that they were inquisitors from the Holy Kingdom. This made Pharma recall the day Eleanor taught him about the temple and its significance. She said the temple was the largest international religious group in the world, and that they were responsible for ascertaining a newborn's guardian deity as well as granting them their aristocratic status. They were also responsible for selecting each nation's ruler and providing them with their wands and crowns. She also talked about the office of the Inquisition, saying they were a group of ruthless elites charged with eliminating evil spirits and heretics who abuse their divine arts for personal gain. Back in the present, Salomon introduced himself to Pharma and asked him to step back. To avoid trouble, Pharma did as he was asked, and the priests attempted to trap him in a binding circle. To their surprise, it didn't work, and Pharma said it was because he wasn't an evil spirit, but they refused to believe him. One of the priests attacked him with divine fire, hoping to make him reveal his true form, but Pharma countered the attack by creating a nitrogen barrier and removing the oxygen to extinguish the fire. Another priest attacked him with ice, but Pharma proved he was the plot by eliminating the water. Shocked, Salomon ordered that they forget about capturing Pharma alive and annihilate him right there. Following his command, the priests attacked Pharma at the same time, but the homeboy protected himself with an ice barrier. Realizing that they wouldn't back down or listen to reason, he decided to show them a glimpse of what he could do. Before the priests could create a defensive barrier, Pharma hit them with a gust of wind and blinding light, causing Salomon to fall off his horse. Worried, the other priests dismounted their horses and rushed to Salomon's side. However, they became immobile when they noticed the large block of ice hovering above Pharma, who was in the avatar state. Just then, Salomon noticed the mark in his arm and said he'd been a blind fool for failing to see what was before him. According to him, Pharma had no shadow because he was the god Paniktheos. Immediately, the other priests got on their knees and apologized to Pharma. Salomon attempted to end his life to atone for what he believed was a grave sin, but Pharma stopped him before he could pierce his throat with a knife. He told Salomon that he didn't want anyone to get hurt for his sake and used his divine eye to ascertain how hurt Salomon was. Once he discovered that it was an open fracture, he contemplated and weighed his options before deciding to perform the first aid treatment himself. He created a stone table and ordered the priests to put Salomon on it, after which he asked them to send for a carriage. A tent was then placed around the stone table, and before Pharma began the procedure, he explained the process to Salomon as best as he could, asking for his consent. Once Salomon gave it, Pharma got to work by first performing a spinal tap to eliminate the pain and using a chunk of ice to confirm that it worked. Salomon was amazed by this and wondered if it was one of the guardian deity's miraculous feats. Ignoring his words and misconceptions, Pharma continued with the treatment, and when he finished, he went outside to inform the other priests. He told them that Salomon's life was no longer in danger and asked them to take him to the temple. The grateful priests asked how they could repay him, and Pharma told them to keep what they had witnessed a secret. Months later, Salomon, who was now the new bishop of the temple in the city, paid a surprise visit to the pharmacy. He came bearing gifts, and after giving Eleanor and Charlotte a box of treats, he turned his attention to Pharma. He thanked the young proprietor for saving his life and apologized for all the trouble he caused by going after him. He then revealed that to ensure that he could be in service to Pharma, he underwent countless procedures and backed the bishop. He also revealed that he'd stopped the rumors about the shadowless heretic boy in the capital. Changing the topic, Pharma asked why he came with more guards than he needed, and Salomon asked him to give him some of his time. To accommodate the bishop, the pharmacy was closed early for lunch, and Salomon presented Pharma with a wand which had been kept in the temple for years. He said its name was Panek Rabdos, and Pharma asked if it was okay for him to have it. Salomon assured him that he could and encouraged him to pick it up, so Pharma did. The next moment, the wand glowed, and Salomon happily announced that the wand had acknowledged Pharma. Eleanor was so entranced by the glowing wand, and when Pharma noticed, he asked if she wanted to hold it, to which she responded yes. However, when he tried to hand it to her, the wand fell through her hands like they weren't there. Salomon then explained that the wand was not of their world, and that only guardian deities could wield it. This made Eleanor start teasing Pharma, but he told her to cut it out, as he wasn't a god. Just then, he noticed something and asked Salomon if the wand could float, and Salomon told him that it could. Intrigued, Pharma tried it, and when he sat on it, Eleanor told him that he looked like he was ready for a game of Quidditch. A little while later, Salomon bid Pharma farewell, but before leaving, he gave Pharma a talisman which suppressed divine power, and Pharma was happy to finally have a shadow. After Salomon took his leave, Pharma joined Charlotte and Blanche, and the trio went shopping in the city. As they walked around, Pharma overheard a woman inquiring about the medicines he made from another store. The storekeeper told her that they didn't sell Pharma's products because his store was heretical, and the guild forbade them from doing business with him. Pharma thought it was wrong of the guild to restrict its members and tried to think of a way to help the commoners. The next day, he talked to Eleanor about establishing another guild to help the commoners sell his products without issues. She said that, according to regulations, 2 stores were enough to create a guild, so he said he'd start with the pharmacy and the cosmetic store. He asked Cedric to help with the paperwork and said he couldn't wait to have partners so that his workload would be reduced. The next day, the Pharmacist Guild held a meeting, and Vernon didn't try hiding the fact that he was angry that Pharma's pharmacy was thriving. His words made some of the guild members whisper amongst themselves, saying he was responsible for the cart attack. Unaware of this, Vernon continued complaining about how Pharma had taken all their customers, but urged his members to be steadfast and continue holding on. According to him, Pharma's sinister plot would soon unfold, and then everyone would know he was nothing but a con artist. All the other guild members clapped and cheered him on after his speech, but Pierre remained quiet. Later that day, Pierre took his daughter to a clinic, but nobody answered the door, no matter how hard he knocked. Pharma happened to pass by at that moment, and he informed Pierre that the clinic was closed until the following week. Seeing how desperate and worried Pierre was, Pharma offered to examine his daughter and invited him to his pharmacy. Pierre thought of declining his offer, but one look at his sick daughter and he changed his mind. Charlotte went ahead to prepare the things Pharma would need while Pharma led Pierre to the pharmacy. When they arrived, Pharma took him to the back entrance, and Pierre assumed it was because he was a commoner. When they got inside, Pharma instructed Pierre to lay his daughter on the examination table. He then proceeded to hand the man a face mask, explaining that it was to prevent the infection from spreading. This made Pierre realize that Pharma had taken them through the back entrance because he didn't want to risk spreading the disease to the other customers. As Pierre watched Pharma work, he was in awe, as he'd never seen someone so meticulous and skilled. After examining the girl the normal way, Pharma used his divine eye to confirm his diagnosis that she had influenza. Since the people of that world were unfamiliar with the term, Pharma simplified it by saying she had a cold. Pierre found it impossible to believe that a simple cold had given his daughter such a high fever, but Pharma explained why that was. He also explained how to take the medicine and allowed the girl to sleep in the clinic so he could monitor her fever. At night, Pharma escorted Pierre and his daughter outside and told Pierre that if her condition should worsen, he should inform the guards. Pierre was surprised that Pharma was willing to see a patient during the night, and he explained that he didn't mind helping those who needed him. At the gate, Pierre asked what his bill was and received another shock when Pharma told him what it was. He asked why it was so low, and Pharma revealed that he had said it that way because he wanted to ensure that children received the treatment they needed. Later that night, while Pierre was working on some medicines, his wife came to him and informed him that their daughter was sleeping. When she mentioned that the medicine worked like a charm, Pierre revealed that he'd gotten it from the parallel world pharmacy. The woman was surprised that he'd disobeyed the guild and gone there, but Pierre said he'd done it because he couldn't sit back and watch their daughter die. He then began singing Pharma's praises, telling his wife how skilled and unique the young pharmacist was. He said if he could incorporate a fraction of what Pharma knew into his business, he would thrive, but acknowledged that going against the guild would put him out of business. Feeling her husband's frustration, the woman asked him not to make any rash decisions, as they still had a lot of debts to pay, and Pierre assured her that he knew what was at stake. However, he couldn't help but cry and lament the fact that following the guild's rules meant that if she or their daughter fell seriously sick, he wouldn't be able to do anything for them. During the next guild meeting, Vernon continued with his verbal vendetta against the parallel world pharmacy, proving that he was the biggest hater to walk the earth. He complained about how their sales were increasing while their sales were dropping by the day. Some of the members even said that Pharma was as untouchable as Gojo because the bishop and the empress were backing him up. As everyone made their opinions about Pharma known, Pierre remained silent, and when Vernon noticed, he called out to him. Pierre was hesitant to say anything, but Vernon insisted that he wanted to know his opinion, so he opened up. He asked if any of them had ever set foot inside Pharma's establishment, and they answered that they hadn't. He told them to consider doing so because it would help them understand why Pharma was thriving and they were failing. He revealed that he'd taken his daughter there to get treated and told them about how Pharma treated everyone equally. Vernon wasted no time telling Pierre that he was falling for Pharma's twisted propaganda, but Pierre swore that Pharma had no hidden agenda. Still, Vernon argued that all aristocrats were the same, heartless and selfish, and said that they treated commoners worse than the way Frieza treated Saiyans. Vernon then mentioned that the nobles refused to help him in his time of need, revealing that his hatred for them was because they let his son die. As far as he was concerned, all nobles were cut from the same cloth, and sooner or later, Pharma would follow in their footsteps. He said that unless they got rid of Pharma and his establishments, they wouldn't have anything left to their names. Pierre didn't agree with his views and tried to convince the guild members to join hands with Pharma instead of fighting him. Vernon interpreted his words as if he were going against them, so he branded Pierre a traitor and told him to leave the guild. As a result of getting kicked out of the guild, Pierre's shop was smashed up, and all his goods were taken. As he sat in front of his store, mourning his loss, Pharma and Charlotte walked by. He sympathized with Pierre over the loss of his license and goods, and Pierre shared his plans to move to another country to restart his business. It turned out that the only way commoners could run their businesses was if they were part of a guild, and since the Pharmaceutists Guild had expelled him, he had to leave. After hearing this, Pharma asked Pierre if he'd like to join his guild because the Empress had permitted him to start one. Pierre became emotional after hearing this, and he thanked Pharma for giving him another opportunity. Sometime later, Pierre reopened his store and was surprised to see how many people showed up because they had heard he was partnered with Pharma. Pierre was overjoyed and happily welcomed everyone to the grand reopening of his pharmacy. Days later, Bruno dreamed of the past when his friend and fellow pharmacist, Camus, was found guilty of being a heretic by the Inquisitors. Before he was taken away, Bruno spoke to him, asking why he'd conducted gruesome experiments on humans. Camus wasn't remorseful about what he'd done, and he even defended his actions, saying that for as many people who died, more were born in their place. Bruno was appalled by the man before him, but Camus promised that he would one day come to understand why he did what he did. Bruno awoke with a start, and as he sat up in bed, he kept repeating the same question why. Later that day, while the Medici family was in the dining room, Simon came in with a letter from Pal, and after Bruno read it, he asked Pharma to come meet him in the study later. As per Bruno's request, Pharma met him in the study, and Bruno informed him that the annual fair was to take place the following month. He said that merchants from all over the world gathered at the Imperial City for the month-long affair to sell their goods. However, this year, they had to tread with caution because of the disease Pal mentioned in his letter. It so happened that an epidemic broke out on the small island of Pont, which was a colony of the neighboring Netherland Kingdom. According to Pal's letter, about 1,000 people died from the deadly disease, and they were yet to determine the source or find a cure. A group of researchers at Pal's university took back some samples to study them, but 2 of the researchers died while studying them. Bruno said that the deaths of the colonists ended the epidemic. However, merchant ships from the Netherland Kingdom containing goods from Pont Island were headed there. If they were allowed to offload their possibly contaminated cargo at Marcera, Bruno feared that the disease might make its way to the Empire. Understanding his father's fears, Pharma asked if the samples taken from the island or the remains of the dead researchers were still available. Bruno informed him that everything had been incinerated to prevent further contamination, and Pharma agreed that it was for the best. However, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and when Bruno explained how the researchers had fallen ill and died, he became even more worried. He asked Bruno to tell him everything Pell said in his letter concerning the disease, and Bruno confirmed that sketches of the sample were taken after they were observed under a microscope. Feeling hopeful, Pharma told Bruno to ask Pal to send copies of the sketches to him. Meanwhile, at the palace, the Empress was in a meeting with her advisors, and they informed her that the number of deaths from diseases had reduced by 20% over the past year. Credit was given to Pharma's pharmacy and his compounding pharmacy guild, and Elizabeth said she ought to reward Pharma for it. She suggested making him an archduke, but her advisors told her that he was still too young to hold that position. It was then agreed that Pharma's reward would be decided on a later date, and they returned to their meeting. While her advisors discussed, Elizabeth told herself that Pharma wasn't an ordinary boy. She was sure he was possessed by a powerful being and vowed to find a way to support him so that his work wouldn't be affected. Later at the pharmacy, Pharma told Eleanor about what he'd learned that morning from Bruno. They were still discussing it when Charlotte arrived with a message from Pal. One look at the sketches and Pharma confirmed his fears the unknown disease was the Black Death. Following this discovery, Pharma made preparations to detect and contain the disease before it had the chance to spread. He sent people to Marcera with strict instructions on how to handle those coming into the port. After the people left, he and Eleanor went to speak with Bruno to ask for assistance. He told Bruno about his findings, and not surprisingly, the man had already deduced that it was the Black Plague. According to the history books, the last plague happened 210 years ago, and the fatalities were high. Bruno expressed his worry about the contaminated cargo coming from Pont Island, but Pharma told him to relax. He said he'd sent word to the acting governor to set up quarantine stations at the port. Eleanor added that they had also sent some of her students who they had taught some inspection methods to go to Marcera to assist them. All that was left was for them to take precautions in the capital, but Bruno still feared that they couldn't save the people if the disease broke out. Pharma revealed that they had a cure for the disease, and when Bruno heard this, his hope returned in full. Immediately, he asked them to accompany him to the palace so they could ask the Empress for assistance. At the palace, they explained the situation to the Empress, and she agreed to set up checkpoints and limit the point of entry for merchants. Pharma also asked for permission to inspect the cargo at the gates and asked that they eliminate all infection routes by getting rid of rodents and flies and having the people boil their clothes. Without skipping a beat, Elizabeth ordered that the edicts be sent out, and when Bruno thanked her for listening to them, she said it was her duty to protect her empire and subjects. Sometime later, the quarantine stations were set up, and Pharma left Pierre in charge of overseeing things at the capital while he was in Marcera. At the palace, the Empress was given a report on how the quarantine stations and checkpoints were doing. They also told her that the bishop had dispatched his priests to help with the purification process of the cargoes, and she felt relieved. Thankfully, they had managed to contain the rumors about the impending outbreak. Elizabeth ordered that everything be double-checked to ensure that the fair went on without a hitch, because she didn't want anything that would make their enemies think that they were weak. When it was time for Pharma and Eleanor to head to Marcera, Pharma admitted to himself that he was afraid he couldn't stop the outbreak. Eleanor noticed he looked worried, so she placed her hand on his shoulder and told him not to worry. Meanwhile, a hooded figure walked out of a building where some priests lay unconscious, and as he walked around the city, he let out a maniacal laugh. By the time Pharma and Eleanor arrived at Marcera, Pharma was once again troubled, but he pushed his worries aside and told Eleanor to get ready for work. After changing into their protective gear, they met Eleanor's students, who gave them the cargo manifests and crew health check results of all the ships anchored at sea. They informed them that the ships which passed the inspection had had their cargoes purified before they were unloaded. They also put those they suspected to be infected under quarantine and continued to monitor them. Pharma thanked them for the work they had done so far and said that he and Eleanor would take over inspecting the remaining ships. On the first ship, the captain complained about the long wait, and Pharma apologized for the inconvenience but explained that it was necessary. He then asked to see the ship's doctor, and when the man came, he provided Pharma with a detailed report on the ship. To be on the safe side, Pharma asked a few questions about the things in the report before going ahead with the inspection. He and Eleanor took their time to carefully inspect and examine the ship and its crew, and were relieved to find nothing out of the ordinary. After giving them the go-ahead to dock at the port, Pharma provided the doctor with a prescription paper for all the crew members. He explained to the confused man that some of the crew members were exhibiting symptoms of scurvy and told him to present the prescription at the port to get the required medication to treat them. As they headed to the next ship, Eleanor expressed relief at not finding any infected people on the ship. She was still talking about it when an apple landed in the water next to their boat, resulting in a splash. Immediately, she looked up at the culprit and asked if his name was Ryak, but the angry man ignored her and complained about them making him wait. He said he was losing money by the hour, and if he didn't offload his cargo soon, they would all go bad. While he was making his complaints, the captain of the other ship also started complaining. Soon, both men began insulting each other and arguing over who deserved to be attended to first. Tired of listening to them argue like a pair of overbearing kids, Eleanor decided to resolve the issue with her wand. However, before she could make her move, another ship fired warning shots, shocking everyone. The culprit was the Empire's Scarlet Fleet, and when Pharma took a closer look at their captain, he realized it was Old Man Jean, the regular at their store. Jean threatened to throw the arguing merchants overboard if they shut their pie holes up and wait for Pharma to do his job, and they immediately complied. When Pharma and Eleanor boarded Jean's ship, they thanked him for handling the issue, and he assured them that it wasn't a big deal. He then asked Pharma how long his store would be closed because he missed going to the place and wanted to order a large batch of sailors' candy for his men. Pharma told him they would reopen once all the inspections were finished and the Empire wasn't in danger anymore. Later, after the ship inspections were concluded, Pharma and Eleanor joined the rest of their team at the quarantine stations. Eleanor commended them for a job well done and urged them to continue working hard to prevent an outbreak. She also expressed her gratitude to Pharma for deducing what the problem was and swinging into action to prevent the spread. And as she was still speaking, Adam came in. He informed them that multiple people in a small fishing village to the west of Marcera had died after developing high fevers. It so happened that one of the ships that arrived a few days earlier felt the procedures at Marcera's port were too long and decided to go to the fishing village to offload their cargo. According to Adam, the ship had already departed, but the situation at the village had taken a turn for the worse. Pharma announced that he would head to the village and asked that his protective web be brought to him. Eleanor tried to convince him not to go, but Pharma insisted that he had to go. He charged Eleanor with taking care of things while he was away and assured her that she'd do a good job. He then got on his wand and flew off towards the village while wondering how the infection spread. He deduced that it was the rats hiding inside the cargo and made a mental note to find the ship later and purify it to prevent further infections. Since he was distracted, He nearly ran into a bird, and after avoiding it, he almost hit a tree. However, to his surprise, he passed through the tree like a ghost. This made him recall what Salomon said about the wand having special abilities. When he finally arrived at the village, he met some people trying to leave, so he floated down and tried to talk them out of it. The people refused to see reason because they were terrified, and they even accused him of being responsible for the unexpected deaths. According to them, an evil spirit had placed a curse on them, and as far as they were concerned, Pharma was that evil spirit. Since they refused to listen to reason, Pharma exercised his power by erecting an ice barrier around the village. This shut them up, and they finally listened to what he was trying to tell them from the moment he arrived. He told them that those who had died and those who were sick were suffering from the Black Death, and unless he treated them, the infection would spread. After they let him inside, Pharma divided the village into 3 sections: those seriously ill, those slightly sick, and those who weren't infected. Meanwhile, Jean and his men found the missing ship, but unfortunately, everyone on board was dead. Having no choice, he ordered his men to sink the ship so that what was left of the disease they carried would end up at the bottom of the sea. Back in the fishing village, Pharma worked together with the pharmacists to administer medicine to those who were slightly sick. When they were finished, the people thanked him and asked him to let them join him in treating those who were seriously sick, but Pharma refused. In the capital, at the Imperial School of Pharmacy, Professor Casper tried to offer assistance to her fellow professors, but they turned her down. They didn't want anything to do with her since she was close to retirement, and they didn't think her research on molds was important. Already used to their hostility, Casper returned to her lab to continue her research. Her assistant complained about the ill treatment she received from her colleagues, but Casper assured her that she was fine. Just then, someone knocked on the door and informed her that her presence was needed in the president's office. Back in the fishing village, when Pharma went to tend to the sick people, the priests who were with them tried to make him leave, but one of them recognized him from the time Salomon wanted to capture him. He assured the others that they were in good hands and asked them to do everything Pharma asked. Grateful for their help, Pharma used his divine eye to examine the patients and learned that one of the patients had passed on. One had a mild common cold, and the others were infected with the Black Death. After administering drugs to the patient with a cold, he told him he was free to join the other slightly affected patients down in the village. However, he instructed him to change his clothes and asked that he remain isolated for a short period. He then had the priests administer the drugs to the remaining patients, and while they did that, he used his divine art and his wand to increase the drug's effectiveness. When they finished, he tasked the priests with finding the people who brought the illness to the village. He instructed them to burn whatever cargo they had left and administer medicine to those who were infected. Meanwhile, in the capital, Casper stood before Bruno in his office, and she wasn't sure why he'd summoned her. She was a bit nervous. Bruno told her it was concerning her research, and the woman immediately assumed he was pulling the plug on her research funding. She thanked him for the support he'd given her over the years, but begged him to give her time to wrap up her research. Realizing that the woman had misunderstood him, Bruno cut her short and assured her that she wasn't getting fired. He explained that her research held the key to saving their world, and the surprised woman asked how that was possible. He said he needed her to find a new species of microorganisms and extract a medicinal substance from it. To make her understand better, he handed her Pharma's notes, and after reading the detailed description, she asked who had written it. Bruno said he couldn't disclose that information to her, but said he was entrusting her to get the job done. Casper took back the document and, after reading it again, informed Bruno that the actinomycete had already been subcultured in her lab. She then took him to her lab to show him the organism, and Bruno announced that he would establish a special presidential budget for her. He also ordered the other scholars to focus their attention on helping Casper extract the medicinal substance to create the new drug. Just then, his secretary came looking for him, and she informed him that there was a report from Marcera. Back at the fishing village, Pharma and the remaining priests finally emerged from the clinic. The villagers asked how the patients were, and Pharma answered that although some of the patients died, they still managed to save a good number of them. He also told them that even though the crisis had been averted, they still needed to be cautious and advised them not to venture out of the village for the next 2 weeks. Before flying off, he warned them against touching rodents and instructed them to eradicate all rodents they came across. As he zoomed off in his wand, he worried that he'd spent too much time treating the villagers and wondered if the missing crew had been found. Just then, he noticed smoke rising in the air and flew in that direction to investigate the cause. Fortunately, it was the priests he'd sent to track down the crew, and they were in the middle of burning the cargo they seized from the men. They told Pharma that the men they had caught had been left behind because they were too sick to keep up. After hearing this, Pharma began questioning the men and asking how many carts and cargo they had brought ashore. The men didn't want to answer, so Pharma let them know that they were dying and said if they wanted to get treatment, they had to answer all his questions. This seemed to do the trick because the men started talking and spilled the tea about where their crew was. They told him that they had 4 carts and said that one of those carts contained animals. Immediately, Pharma asked what kind of animals, and they revealed that they were white squirrels from Pond Island. Shocked by the revelation, asked how many of their friends were headed for the capital. One of the men said 24 workers and 5 holy knights, which sounded strange to him since he didn't know what a holy knight was. The priests explained that holy knights were combat-specialized divine art users who usually worked for an important noble or answered directly to the royal family. This made Pharma question all that he knew, and he wondered if Bruno had been right about someone trying to harm the Empress. His thoughts were interrupted by the men who pleaded with him to give them the medicine. The priests didn't want to do it, but Pharma told them that it didn't matter what they had done and said that he would always offer medicine to those who needed it. However, he instructed them to turn the men over to the authorities after they recovered. Meanwhile, at the capital, Bruno informed the Empress about what had happened in the fishing village. He told her that Pharma was handling the situation in the village, but said that his sources confirmed that the missing crew were on their way to the capital. She immediately ordered that security be strengthened at the gates, emphasizing that Gate 6 be given special attention since it faced the direction of Marcera. The next day, an infected sample was brought to Pierre, and once he discovered it, he instructed his people to go and quarantine the infected people. When they arrived at the gate, there was an explosion, and the guards tried to keep the holy knights from entering the city. Unfortunately, the knights pushed their way inside and released the squirrels, using divine wind art to scatter them around. The wind destroyed the quarantine tents, but thankfully, none of the pharmaceutists were harmed. After Pierre crawled out from underneath the tent, he asked what had happened. His people explained what happened, and the moment he heard about the squirrels, he panicked. He told them that they needed to capture the squirrels and rushed to tell the guards to sound the alarms so that people knew to lock up their homes and businesses. As the bells rang out loud, the people had mixed reactions, but the cloaked man remained calm. A guard immediately rushed into the meeting room to inform the Empress that they were under attack by knights from the Netherland Kingdom. She asked how many people were on the Netherlands side, and the guard replied that they were only 5. Upon hearing this, the woman asked why they were panicking like a bunch of school kids and ordered that they take care of the enemy immediately. Just then, Bruno spoke up and asked them to consider that the enemy was on a mission to infect the people of the Empire. He assured the Empress that she need not fear getting infected because he'd provide her with the new drugs for the Black Death. The woman was grateful to him. However, something didn't sit right with her, so she asked why the Netherland Kingdom would want to attack them. Voicing his opinion, Bruno said he was sure it was the doing of Camus, the pharmacist who had his divine art sealed away and was cast out as a commoner after it was discovered that he performed gruesome tests on humans. At the same time, the guards engaged the Holy Knights in battle, but the knights proved to be stronger. Fortunately, Solomon showed up and captured them using his divine art, after which he sealed away their divine art. Elsewhere, a worried Charlotte had just asked Cedric what they should do when an explosion occurred nearby. Charlotte wondered if people were hurt in the explosion and pointed out that it had occurred near the pharmacy. Cedric realized that she wanted to head over there, so he told her not to, as Pharma would be sad if she got hurt. Feeling helpless, she turned to look at the rising smoke and was filled with hope when she noticed Pharma had returned. Speaking of Pharma, the boy landed on the bell tower and did a quick sweep of the city using his divine eye. He discovered that infections had taken root in people and became worried when he noticed the flying squirrel that the knights had released. However, instead of chasing after the rodent, he chose to head to the gate where the knights had been captured. On his way there, he spotted Bruno, so he went down to speak with him. After talking about Marcera, the two approached the guards who were questioning one of the captured knights. The guards asked why they had released the Black Death in the Empire, even though it bordered their kingdom. Surprisingly, the knight had no idea what they were talking about and explained that they only did what Camus ordered them to do. He said Camus was holding the populace hostage, and another knight backed him up, saying Camus had the power to isekai thousands of people in the blink of an eye. The blonde-haired knight then said that Camus was possessed by an evil spirit. Bruno arrived in time to catch the tail end of what they were saying, and once he confirmed that it was truly Camus behind the attacks, he became angry. Sadly, the knights died after succumbing to their injuries, so Bruno ordered that they be buried. A little while later, the bells stopped ringing, so Charlotte rushed off to check on the pharmacy before Cedric could stop her. At the gate, Pharma stood watching the remains of the knights getting burned when he suddenly felt a sinister presence. Immediately, he turned to find the source using his divine eye and was shocked to see Camus standing on the roof of the pharmacy. Bruno noticed his troubled look and asked if everything was fine, but Pharma just ran off, saying he needed to check on his pharmacy. As Bruno watched him rush off, he suddenly turned around and ordered that the bells be started up again. He told himself that he needed to find Camus and strike him down before it was too late. Meanwhile, Charlotte arrived at the pharmacy, and when she saw that the windows on the 4th floor were open, she assumed that Pharma was inside. Cedric arrived just as the bells started ringing again, and the two wondered if another enemy had shown up. Choosing not to worry about that for the moment, Charlotte suggested they go inside, so Cedric unlocked the door. However, as Charlotte rushed inside, it suddenly dawned on him that something was wrong. He called out to Charlotte to wait for him, but the girl was too fast for her good and rushed to Pharma's lab. When she got there and didn't find anyone, she became confused, but instead of leaving, she decided to go close the window. Cedric came in before she could do that, and as he began scolding her for rushing off, he was stabbed by Camus. Charlotte became frozen with fear and didn't try to run as Camus approached her. Pharma arrived shortly after, and when he noticed that Camus was in his lab, he wondered what business he had there. Bruno arrived before he could rush inside, so they decided to go in together. Upon reaching the lab, they found Camus standing in a corner while Charlotte and Cedric were on the floor where he'd left them. Camus commented that he could sense a powerful light, but before he could do anything, Bruno attacked him. Pharma rushed to check on Cedric and Charlotte and discovered that they had been stabbed with a poison knife. While Bruno fought Camus, Pharma tried to determine which poison was used on his friends, and he soon discovered that it was more than one. Bruno was soon overpowered by Camus, and the evil spirit turned its attention to Pharma. As he approached him, he grabbed a jar of poison and began spewing a lot of rubbish about the beauty of life and whatnot. Eventually, he attempted to attack Pharma with the poison, but Pharma eliminated it. He then stood up and angrily told Camus that he was incurable, and Camus asked what he intended to do about it. In response, Pharma punched him in the face, and Camus angrily asked why he couldn't see and appreciate his ideas. He said Pharma was like him and said they were the only ones who could appreciate the truth of the world. The next moment, he tossed 2 jars of poison at Pharma, but the boy eliminated them. Annoyed that he failed again, he taunted Pharma, saying that he would end up like him because people would never understand or appreciate him. Pharma said he didn't care about that because all he wanted to do with his power was heal people. He then channeled more energy into his fist and punched Camus out of the building and into the courtyard. As Camus lay on the ground, Pharma jumped out of the window and stabbed him with his wand. Camus screamed in agony as he was purified and vanished, leaving behind a colorful light that Salomon recognized as the after effects of the cleansing sanctuary spell. Charlotte, Cedric and Bruno came downstairs after everything had settled, and the teary-eyed Charlotte went to hug Pharma to welcome him home. As the days progressed, Pharma treated Charlotte and Cedric's wounds, bringing them back to full health. Eleanor finished up with the inspections at the port, preventing an influx of the disease into the Empire. Pharma also developed more medicines to treat the Black Death, and had his people distribute them to all those who got infected. Even Vernon got the medicine, but he was too proud to accept it, and chose not to take it at all. However, he gave it to his wife. Casper continued with her research and managed to find useful microorganisms which were used to develop more drugs and vaccines. 2 months later, a celebration was held, and the Empress declared that the Black Death epidemic was over. Pharma reopened his pharmacy, and the people tripped in the same way they did before everything went south. Do you think Pharma fits in the category of overpowered MC? If you've watched up to this point and loved the video, comment your favorite Amaterasu member. Also, check out the next video. See you guys in the next video.